Yeah, I know. I know everything there is to know about flying. I never forget a thing at all. I'm that good. Welcome to the Superpilotish channel. My name's Graham Wilson, and today in my basement, I'm going to be talking to you about the book Stick and Rudder, a book review. So, I got this book a long time ago, sort of a long time ago, actually, after I graduated from college when I'd already gotten a commercial pilot's license and a multi IFR rating. So I was working in a machine shop, and there was another machine shop that was kind of right next door to it. It was kind of laid out strangely. And one of the owner of the other shop found out that I knew how to fly an airplane. So he said, "Oh, you I hear you're a pilot." And I said, "Yeah, just saving up some cash here, because I was broke after I finished learning how to fly. So I went back to working in a machine shop. But I did want to get into it and eventually did. So this guy he said, "Oh, well, I used to own a Taylorcraft." And I said, "Oh, that's pretty cool. Another pilot person. Let's talk airplane like pilots do, right?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I got about 4,000 hours." And I was thinking to myself, "Wow, I got like 250. Yeah, boy, this guy must really know what he was doing." But then I kind of did the math in my head like years and years later, and I found out that this guy was just full of it. Like, there's no way this guy had 4,000 hours. This guy was so full of BS. But yeah, he was kind of more of a sales guy than a business guy, and he ended up like going out of business, and he owed everyone in town money. And so, anyways, he got me this book. He's like, "Here, read this," and I was like, "Oh, I've never read that before." Okay, so I'm thinking about it now. He probably threw this on his credit card and just never paid it off. So, anyways, but thanks for the book, dude. Yeah, he passed away years ago, but yeah, owed everyone in town money. It's really bad. But boy, you talk to him, and was he ever an expert on everything? So, but anyways, it was interesting the way that this guy gave me the book. So, a lot of times when you're working 9 to 5 or you're working during the day shift, you're working and when you're done work, you just feel like chilling out, watching TV, not really doing too much. But if sometimes you gotta force yourself to do a little something extra after work. So he gave me the book, and I was like, okay, threw it on the table. I'll get around to reading that, and didn't read it at all. Then the next day he said, "Oh, so have you read the book?" And I said, "No." So, anyways, the next day he said, "Oh, have you read the book?" And then I lied and said, "Yes." And then he said, "Oh, what was the most important thing that you found out about it? Or like, what was the most important thing that you read in the book?" I was like, uh, so I got caught in the lie. So the next day, I was okay. I better read this here. And the next day he says, "Oh, what was the most important thing that you read in the book?" And I was like, "Oh, this." Uh, so he's like, "Oh, good." And he kept asking me that until I finished the whole book. So he kind of, I guess it was maybe a little manipulative or something. Maybe that's why he was such a good sales guy. He could get people to do what he wanted. But I did end up going through the book, and I still do go through the book every once in a while. It's the type of book that you should read as a pilot. It's not that scientific. It's Stick and Rudder, an explanation of the art of flying by good old Wolfgang Langewiesche. Yeah, there we go. That's what it looks like. And yeah, it's just a must read if you're a pilot. If you're a student, highly recommended. If you're an airline captain, highly recommended if you haven't read it, because it really is the basics of here's an airplane. This is how it flies through the air without being too technical and without being too boring. So, like, it's pretty well written. And so, it's one of these books that you can kind of just pick up after, it's been. I haven't read it for a couple years. You get these books, you read them, and you throw them up on the bookshelves. So, like, look at that. I read that. Aren't I awesome? Yeah. I read it 20 years ago and I forgot everything that's in it. But this thing here, you can kind of pick it up. And I always do it every, I don't know, whenever I kind of think about it, probably every year or two or something. I've had this for 16 years, I think. And you can just pick it up and pick out any page in here and just start reading something. And it'll jog your memory on, oh yeah, I learned that in ground school, or oh yeah, I used to teach that in ground school, or I do that all the time when I fly, except for that little thing. Oh yeah, that's a good tip. So you can't remember every single little tip that you read in a book. There might be 20. You might remember one or two or something like that. So yeah, you can just kind of pick up. I did it just this morning. I did it. I was like, oh, let's take a look at this. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So the cool thing that I was looking at today was, and I never really thought about it, but it kind of makes sense. It's just something really simple, like, I'll get out the old whiteboard. Haven't used that in a little while. So here we go. We're going to have the whiteboard. We're going to talk about an aircraft's journey. So here we go. Here is the whiteboard, and the aircraft goes like this. That's what the aircraft does. And then it goes up like this. It climbs up, then it goes flat. Very high tech, right? And then it descends. And then it lands. That's what an airplane does. So, yeah. So I was looking at it specifically. So this is your takeoff. And we'll call this the climb. Okay, so we're taking off here. Boom. There's all kinds of things that affect your takeoff distance, speeds, angle, and then transitioning into climbing up. But what really, just a little tip that I just read, and I never really thought about it too much, but it was like, okay, climbing. So here's the debate. It's like, what is better, to climb up to a nice high altitude right away and just blast it right up, or do you kind of climb up so you get to a nice safe height and then kind of do more of an en route climb this way? So what is the better way of doing it? It turns out that the better way of doing it is climb up here at first, get to a nice, pretty safe altitude, and then just do kind of a shallow en route climb, as they call it. And the reasoning behind that, and like you could read about this in the different charts in the books and everything like that. But if your plane is climbing up very steeply like that, you're going at full power, so you're burning lots of gas, and the propeller is less efficient when you're climbing up at that steep angle of climb. So if you can use less gas, so you're not at full power when you're doing your en route climb here, you're getting more distance, and your propeller is more efficient as it goes through the air. So you will get, when you land at your destination, you'll have a little extra fuel. There you go. You burn less gas if you do it that way. And it was like, yeah, that makes sense. But I never thought about, like, oh yeah, the propeller is less efficient when you're doing a very steep climb. There we go. Thanks, Stick and Rudder. So another thing there too was, okay, we're en route. Then we're going to descend. So I was thinking about it too. Whoops. We'll wipe that out. A little spelling mistake. Okay. So there's your descent. We're going to be going down here. If you are concerned about getting more range, then it was also, I was reading just a bit more in the book that that your airplane, when it's descending, the most efficient way of the airplane going through the air is every airplane has what they call a best glide speed. So if you have a engine failure, maybe we'll get the old KD12X out here. Yeah, so if you have an engine failure and you're glide, right? So there's a certain speed where you can glide the biggest distance or the longest distance. It's just like that. And so that's kind of determined by test pilots and engineers and stuff like that. There'll be a number in the book. Here's your number, engine failure, trim it for this speed, and down you go. So you'll get the most distance. So the reason is because they got this whole lift drag curve thingamajig and everything like that. But that speed is where your airplane it's gliding through the air at the most efficient way. So if you are going to save some fuel and you want to, like, usually if you're descending and you're going to your destination, you're just going to be, I'll just rip it down there, whatever, at my cruising speed of whatever, 100 knots, 120 knots, or whatever you're doing. But if you actually were really tight on fuel, what you would want to do is slow down to your best glide speed at that speed and then descend at that rate. That will get you the furthest distance. And you won't burn up the gas, and you might be able to stretch it out to the airport a little bit more. So it would be, yeah, the closer you can fly to that speed, the more efficient you are. So it's kind of like that's pretty wild, and you kind of go over that when you're teaching people in your when you're teaching about, yeah, like engine failures and stuff like that, simulated engine failures. But you never really think about it in a context of like a cross-country flight where you're low on fuel. But that is where Stick and Rudder just kind of jogged my memory on that today. So that was pretty neat. It was like, and I will demonstrate to you how cool. Well, this is already cool. Oh, did you know craft dinner? Now you see how this is. Okay, this was from a case of KD. So the little shrinkflation, the new KD boxes are no longer 225 grams. They are 200 grams. Shrinkflation. Womp, womp. That's the way it goes. Nothing ever gets cheaper. That's life. Flying never gets cheaper, that's for sure. But yeah, so I'm going to just do a little experiment here. I'm just going to open up the book, and whatever I pick out of the book is probably going to be pretty interesting to me anyways. So here we go. And I found this old bookmark in here too. That was weird. I was like, where'd that old bookmark come from? And I can tell it was just a little bit of the very end of, if you're working in the industry of television or movies or something like that, the very bottom of a call sheet. So it's kind of like that's the, if you're working in the movie or TV industry, there's every day you get a call sheet. So this is kind of the schedule for what you're going to do that day on the transportation or, makeup and wardrobe and stuff like that. And it was like, oh yeah, that's the very bottom of a call sheet when I worked years ago in the business. Well, one season of one season of Hard Rock Medical, season 1, I was a driver. All right, so here we go. We're going to do a random flip flop through the book right about here. What's that one? Okay, here we go. Oh, it's about landing. All right, what now? What is good old Wolfgang going to tell me about landing? Okay, here we go. Well, I guess the first thing that caught my eye was called the floating landing. Now, another thing about the Stick and Rudder book, a lot of the stuff, because it was written in 1944, at that time, most of the training airplanes were of the conventional or tail dragger style, like the KD-12X Mark II. So when they talk about landing and stuff like that, a lot of times it's about like a tail dragger, conventional, not tricycle gear. But let's see what the floating landing tells me about. Now that I've done a little bit of tail wheel flying, so let's see if this will help me out. Okay, now for a close look at the maneuver, which brings the ship down to the ground on its 3 points. That's another thing too. He talks about it. You're flying your airship, 1944 style. Apparently, Wolfgang Langewiesche, he taught ground school, theory of flight, for the pilots in World War II. Okay, right. This can be done in two different ways: the floating landing and the stall down landing. Okay, that's kind of news to me. To prevent confusion, let's state once more that those are two different ways of getting the airplane down for 3 point contact with the ground. The stall down landing is more difficult, more precise, and more proper. It is the way the Army prefers in primary training. Hmm. We shall discuss the floating landing first because it's easier to do and much easier to understand. Okay, well, go for it, Wolfgang. Okay, the pilot approaches in a normal glide and levels out only when quite near the ground. So he finds himself shooting along level, a foot or two off the ground with plenty of excess speed. Okay, so he's describing you coming down here and you're a couple feet off the ground. All right, Wolfgang, I got you so far. What else are you going to tell me? Okay, the process of landing then consists simply of holding the ship off the ground as long as possible. Because the engine is idling and the flight path is level, speed will naturally slacken. As the speed slackens, I like the way that he writes this in 1940 style. Hey, boys, let's go get the Jerry's. Okay, as the speed slackens, the lift decreases, the ship will sink through to the ground, making a bad wheels first contact unless the pilot comes back on the stick, pulling the nose up and forcing the airplane to a higher angle of attack. The higher angle of attack then restores the lift so the ship keeps floating, but presently the speed slackens again, and again it will sink until the angle of attack is again increased by pulling the stick farther back. The higher angle of attack, the more rapidly does the speed slacken. The more rapidly the speed slackens, the faster you got to increase the angle of attack. So that this hold off requires continual backward motion of the stick, which is at first imperceptibly slow, then becomes faster, and finally, in some ships, ends up almost a yank that brings the stick back into the pilot's stomach. With the stick all the way back, there is nothing else the pilot can do to hold the ship off the ground. It will sink to the ground, and as described above, its landing gear legs are so proportioned that as it sinks down in this flight condition, it's bound to hit on all 3 points at once. So okay, so he's describing a 3 point landing, and yeah. So that is the floating landing. So that's the way I used to always, that's the way everybody teaches people how to land, even a tricycle gear airplane. You come down, you're going idle power, and you hold it off, increasing your angle of attack, and eventually you'll land like that. And if you're in a tricycle gear, not this conventional gear, so there's your 3 point landing. But if you're in like a Cessna 172, you'd land on the mains first, the main landing gear, main wheels first, in a nose up attitude, and there you go, something like that. So interesting. So the stall down landing is more difficult. I wonder what a stall down landing is. To prevent. Okay, so the stall down landing, more precise and more proper. So that would probably be, I'd imagine, if you keep it in like a 3 point attitude. This is all talking about tail draggers and stuff back then. So I'd imagine a stall down is like you're just keeping it above. You're keeping this this kind of 3 point attitude and just using the power to put you where you want to go. That's my guess. I'll have to check that out. What is a stall down? Maybe that's some. It's probably like super unsafe or something. I'll take a note on that. Stall down landing. Okay, so there we go. So what he's talking about here when you're landing your airplane, and he actually mentions the hold off in quotes. Hold off requires a continual backward motion. And that's exactly how we teach people. We actually called it the hold off part of landing. So that's pretty cool. So they were using that terminology back in 1944. Pretty cool. So yeah, it's just little stuff like that. All right, let's pick some other random thing here. Maybe about here. Oh, look at that. We even got some really cool graphs. Look at that. What would that be called? I don't know. Flying around in circles or something. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's kind of right. What do we got here? So the first one here, where you're flying around in a circle, it says, in calm air, the pilot who describes a perfect continuous circle through the air also describes a circle over the ground. Really? Okay. But the next one here, and we actually teach that when we're teaching students how to fly. This looks like it's kind of okay. This is under wind drift, but yeah, that would be what's that exercise in the flight training manual? Illusions due to drift. That's what it is. So you kind of do you kind of do some stuff like this with your student. Okay, in moving air, the pilot who describes exactly the same continuous circle through the air describes this pattern over the ground. Yeah, so if it's calm air, you're flying around like this, no sweat, at the same angle of bank all the way around. But if the wind is blowing you, you're still going around, but the wind's also blowing you sideways. So you'll make this kind of funny movement. It'll blow you right off. So there we go. So that's in the case where you something like that, you would change your angle of, you'd show that you would have to change the angle of bank to more or less to counteract the wind to make a little circle like that. That's illusions due to drift, and that gets taught. And at the low altitude, it can be really weird. So lower altitude. Okay, well, there we go. Very slick. So they're still teaching that today. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I could just go on and on about this book, but I won't. Because, oh well, we got about 20 minutes in of me yakking. And once again, I will say Stick and Rudder is definitely a good book to buy if you know somebody that is a pilot, or you're thinking about maybe a Christmas present or something like that. Maybe someone's learning how to fly. Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad Christmas present. Every pilot would appreciate getting this, but you might want to check, do they already have it? So, or you could say something, say Christmas is coming in December. Around now, you'd say, like, have you ever heard about this book called Stick and Rudder? Some guy was talking about it in his basement today. And if the pilot says, like, nah, never heard of it, there you go. Keep the receipt, maybe, and then you can buy it for Christmas. And there you go. And the pilot will. And you can always do what the old guy did to me and ask, what was the most important thing that you learned in the book? There you go. And there you go. So Dustin popped in here. He learned some good stuff. And Wrench, yes, you are late, but that's okay. You're playing hooky from work, so no big deal. But yeah, so suffice to say, Stick and Rudder, very good book. It's a classic. You will definitely learn something from here. Oh, here we go. So Wrench is leaving a little comment. Wrench always wanted that book. Learned to do a cub. That guy talked about it. Yeah. So yeah, Wrench, you can go back and rewatch what I was talking about. But yeah, this is like it's definitely good for any pilot of any level, student, airline pilot. If you haven't read it, you must. And it's like there will be stuff you go like, oh yeah, of course I know that. But there'll be a couple of things that you go, oh really? Oh, like I guarantee every pilot will go through this, and so oh yeah, good thinking. Like at any level. So I do every few years when I pick it up. It's like, oh yeah, just like I did today. So okay, there we go. Something for you to buy there, Wrench. And I'm not putting any links to descriptions below. It's available at pretty much every airport, Amazon, wherever you want to buy it at. Stick and Rudder by Wolfgang Langewiesche. And yeah, very good. So that's about it for today. Let me see here. Oh, what else we got here? Another little comment. Ironically, my pilot feet are mostly dead. Cessnas, yeah. Well, they wake up quickly if you get to a tail dragger or a float plane, so that's all right. And even if you're dead foot Cessna, lazy Cessna feet, it'll still help out with something else. So, okay. Yeah, today is Wednesday. Oh boy, doesn't time fly. So, yeah, I'll be back on Friday because I do this Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon Eastern, and we'll just kind of shut her down. So, thank you for watching. Bye.